She first saw him sitting alone on the cold bench of the group home, his eyes vacant, his thin fingers gripping the torn sleeve of his too small sweater. He was 9. His record said he had been through 3 foster homes in 2 years, all of them ending in some kind of failure, and the staff didn't bother sugarcoating it. He was angry, withdrawn, and difficult, but something in his silence caught her attention, something she couldn't explain. She had come intending only to volunteer, to offer time and comfort to children with nowhere to go, but the boy didn't want comfort. He didn't want anything. She saw that as a reason to stay. Her name was Helen. She wasn't wealthy. She worked as a school librarian in a small town and lived in a modest house that smelled of old books and cinnamon. She had never married, not because she didn't want to, but because life never offered her the right kind of companionship. She had long accepted her quiet routine until she met the boy. His name was Marcus, or at least, that's what he'd been called since age 4. No one really knew what name he had before that. He never spoke about it, never spoke much at all in those early weeks. But he let her sit beside him. That was enough. The adoption process took nearly a year. She wasn't the youngest candidate, and her single status raised concerns, but she kept showing up. Every weekend she visited, bringing books he never read and puzzles he never touched. She told the caseworkers she didn't expect to change him, only to care for him. Maybe that's what convinced them. When he finally moved into her home, he barely unpacked. She gave him the bigger bedroom. He closed the door and stayed inside for hours. Still, she cooked meals and left his plate warm on the table. She sat in the hallway some nights, reading aloud through the crack in the door. She never forced him to answer. She only waited. It took a year before he began speaking in full sentences, another before he started calling her Mom. She didn't cry when he said it the first time, but later, in the kitchen, she had to steady her hands before she could stir the soup. He was still difficult at times, mood swings, long silences, a sudden outburst when someone moved his things, but he was also brilliant. He read quickly once he started, devouring books about space and animals. He liked building things, Legos, puzzles, model planes. Helen nurtured every interest, even when money was tight. She took on extra tutoring hours to buy him a telescope after he spent a month talking about stars. He used it every night. She never told him about the inheritance, not because she didn't trust him, but because she believed children should grow up without the weight of money. Years ago, her older brother died in a boating accident. He had been a tech investor in Silicon Valley, the kind who rarely spoke to family and always sent Christmas cards late. But he had left everything to her, his stocks, accounts, assets. By the time lawyers finished untangling the details, the total was staggering. She lived modestly, only upgrading her roof and adding a small garden to the backyard. She kept the rest quietly invested, untouched, growing. Not even Marcus knew. She didn't think he needed to. Over the years, they settled into a rhythm. She helped him through high school, through awkward friendships and the quiet ache of his identity questions. She stayed up all night once when he was 16 and couldn't stop shaking after a nightmare. She held his hand through the grief of losing a pet dog. She clapped the loudest at his high school graduation. And when he got into college, she was the one who drove him to the dorms, trying not to cry on the way back. He never liked hugs, but he let her hug him that day. She told herself that meant something. In college, Marcus changed, not at first. Their phone calls remained steady, their emails warm. But by junior year, things grew distant. He had a girlfriend. She never met her, only saw pictures on social media. When he came home for holidays, he was distracted, always on his phone. He stopped asking for her advice. He brushed off her questions. Helen didn't mind. She told herself it was part of growing up. She remembered how people drifted sometimes and found their way back. But something deeper had shifted. His eyes, once searching for comfort, now looked past her. She noticed but said nothing. She didn't want to be a burden. She only wanted him to be happy. College gave Marcus more than just an education. It gave him a new identity, one that he shaped carefully, piece by piece, shedding the rough edges of his past like an old skin. He learned how to talk with confidence, how to carry himself in a room full of people with wealth and ambition. He changed his wardrobe, his speech, even the way he smiled. It wasn't fake, it was practiced. He was learning what worked. In his third year, he met Alicia. She was smart, beautiful, ambitious, the daughter of a real estate investor who owned properties across 3 states. Alicia had grown up in a different world, one where vacations meant flying private and birthday gifts came with a bow and a deed. She liked Marcus. He was mysterious, intense, driven. He didn't come from money, which intrigued her, but he didn't act like someone who lacked it either. She once asked about his family, and he replied vaguely, "Raised by a kind older woman, not much else to say." That was enough for her. They moved fast. By graduation, they were engaged. Alicia's father wasn't thrilled at first, but Marcus had ambition, and that was something he respected. He offered him a job in his firm entry level, but promising. Marcus accepted. It was everything he thought he wanted: success, prestige, connections, but with it came pressure. Alicia's standards were high. She expected quality in everything: her clothes, her car, her lifestyle. She didn't understand why Marcus drove a used sedan, or why he hesitated before dining at the kind of restaurants she considered casual. He told her he was being smart with money, but really, he was calculating what would impress her most while still keeping up the illusion at first. He kept calling Helen. Their conversations became shorter, more strained. He told her about Alicia, about the job, about the city. He said he was busy, always busy. Helen listened with pride, never asking too much, never letting on how her heart ached after each call. When he and Alicia visited that first Christmas, Helen cooked everything Marcus used to love: roast chicken with rosemary, mashed sweet potatoes, apple crumble from scratch. Alicia barely touched her plate. She looked around the house with polite detachment, complimented the vintage charm, and asked if they'd be staying in a hotel next time. Helen pretended not to hear. Marcus didn't say much. He scrolled through his phone, answered a few calls. When he hugged her goodbye, it was quick, almost distracted over time. Alicia began influencing more than just Marcus's schedule. She questioned why he still sent Helen money occasionally. "She's a librarian, right? Doesn't she have a pension?" Marcus told her it wasn't about the money. "It's just what you do for family." Alicia didn't argue directly, but her silence lingered. One night, over wine, she asked if he had ever thought about the future, about children, homes, legacy. She asked whether Helen, living alone in her little house, might one day need full-time care. "That's not going to be easy, you know," she said, "and we're just getting started." Marcus nodded, unsure of what to say. He didn't think of Helen as a burden, but something about Alicia's tone planted a seed. They got married the following year, a small, elegant ceremony in Napa. Helen wasn't invited. Marcus told her it was a private event, just immediate friends and colleagues. He sent pictures afterward, carefully selected ones where he and Alicia looked radiant, surrounded by flowers and candlelight. Helen cried quietly that night, her hands trembling as she clicked through the images. She told herself it didn't matter. He was building his own life now. That's what she wanted for him. Alicia continued to shape their world. She urged Marcus to look into real estate, to think long-term. They bought a condo in the city, then talked about upgrading. She wanted more space, more luxury, more control. She suggested Helen might be happier elsewhere, maybe a retirement community. "You said she has no one else, right?" Alicia asked one evening. "Maybe it's time to think realistically. You've done enough. You gave her a good life, but this isn't your responsibility forever." Marcus didn't respond right away. He looked out the window at the skyline, his mind torn between guilt and pride, between who he had been and who he had become eventually. He began to believe her. That maybe he owed Helen gratitude, yes, but not his future. That his success wasn't hers to share indefinitely. He told himself she'd understand, that she'd want what was best for him, and that maybe, just maybe, she had already done her part. After all, she had raised him, saved him, guided him. But now, he told himself, it was time to grow beyond that past, time to move forward, no matter what it cost. Helen's hair had turned fully gray by the time Marcus and Alicia bought their second home, a sleek modern townhouse on the edge of the city. She had stopped dyeing it years ago, letting age take its place naturally. Her steps had slowed, but her mind remained sharp. She still read every day, wrote in her journal, clipped articles from newspapers like she used to when Marcus was a teenager, and she wanted to share something interesting. Only now, the articles stayed folded in a drawer. He hadn't visited in over a year. She didn't complain. When they called, she smiled through the screen, her voice warm, never once mentioning how long it had been since she'd seen them in person. She asked how work was, how Alicia's business was going, whether they were eating well. She never asked about grandchildren. She sensed that subject would only strain things further. She told herself the distance was normal, that this was how life worked. Children grew up and built lives of their own. Still, when she set 2 plates for dinner out of habit, she quietly placed one back in the cabinet. Her body ached more than it used to. The stairs felt longer, mornings felt colder. She'd never been sickly, but age was catching up. A fall in the garden left her with a bruised hip, and though she told no one, she had to sleep sitting up for days. Her doctor suggested she consider assisted living, but Helen waved it off. She had savings, she had independence. What she didn't have was help, but she still managed. She was used to managing alone. One day, her old boiler broke down in the middle of winter. She called Marcus not because she needed money, but because she thought he might know a good repairman in the city. He answered on speakerphone, his tone rushed. Alicia was talking in the background, her voice clipped and sharp. When Helen explained the situation, there was a pause, then Marcus said, "Mom, I really think it's time we talk about something more permanent. You shouldn't be living in that house anymore." Helen hesitated. "It's just a broken boiler. I can fix it." But Marcus pushed. "You shouldn't have to. You're not young anymore. Alicia and I have been thinking. Maybe it's time to downsize. There's a place near us, a senior community. It's nice, clean, safe. They do your laundry, make your meals." Helen listened quietly. Something in her chest tightened, not from the suggestion itself, but from the way he said it. Like a decision had already been made. Like he was reading off a script written without her. A week later, they visited her. It was the first time in over a year. Alicia didn't sit down. She walked through the house like a real estate agent, noting the clutter, the uneven floorboards, the outdated appliances. She asked Helen where her will was, if she had a medical directive, whether her insurance was up to date. Helen answered calmly, offering tea, that no one excepted Marcus was quieter. He walked through his old room, now filled with books and old photos. He didn't say much. When Helen offered him a tin of cookies he used to love, he said he was cutting sugar. She smiled and put them back. 2 weeks later, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a request. Marcus had already spoken to a lawyer, found a buyer for the house, signed the preliminary documents. He brought papers for Helen to sign, telling her it was for her own good, that she would be safer in the new place, that they would visit often. She didn't argue, not because she agreed, but because she saw in his face that arguing wouldn't change anything. The boy she raised, the one who used to cry when his dog had nightmares, was gone. In his place stood a man who saw her as a liability, a figure from a past he didn't want to carry anymore. Alicia supervised the movers. They took only the essentials, a few clothes, a few pieces of furniture. The rest would be handled. Later Helen packed quietly. She folded her things slowly, methodically, as if saying good-bye to each one. She didn't cry, not when they drove away, not when they unlocked the door to the one-bedroom unit in the senior community, not when Marcus handed her the keys and told her they'd call once things settled down. She nodded, thanking them for the ride. Alicia didn't get out of the car. Marcus hugged her with one arm, already halfway back to the driver's seat. Helen watched them drive off, her hands cold despite the afternoon sun. Inside, the room smelled like bleach and fabric softener. She stood by the window for a long time before unpacking, the silence pressing in around her like fog. The apartment they left her in was clean but bare, its walls an off-white color that reminded Helen of hospital corridors. There was no garden, no sound of birds in the morning, no creaking floorboards that told her where she was without needing to open her eyes. It felt like a waiting room, a place meant for transition, not for living. The staff were kind enough, efficient in the way strangers trained to smile politely always were. They brought her meals at the same time every day, asked if she needed anything, reminded her of the daily activities schedule. She declined most of it. Helen stayed quiet, almost invisible. She took walks alone in the early morning, before the halls filled with chatter and card games. She kept to herself, reading by the window, watching the traffic lights blink on in the evenings like clockwork. Sometimes, in the silence, she would think about the garden she had once planted. Tomatoes, herbs, a single stubborn rose bush that bloomed every summer without fail. She wondered who would tend to it now, or whether it had already been pulled up and paved over. No one came to visit. Not after the move. Marcus and Alicia had called once, a brief check-in about how she was adjusting. He sounded tired, distracted, as if doing her a favor by making the call. She told him she was fine, that she was making friends, that the place was comfortable. He didn't ask many questions, said they were planning a trip, maybe overseas, and would be in touch once they returned. She wished them well and hung up before her voice cracked. She spent the next few weeks sorting through the few belongings she had brought. Her photo albums remained untouched. Her books lined one short shelf, but she rarely picked them up. Most of her energy went into something else, writing letters, not to Marcus, not to anyone living. She wrote to her younger self, to the girl who once believed love could fix everything. She wrote to the version of Marcus she still missed, the child with cautious eyes and a hunger for safety. She folded the letters and tucked them away in a drawer, never rereading them. What no one knew was that Helen had never actually needed help, not financially, not even physically, not yet. She had hidden her discomfort because she didn't want pity, not because she was helpless. The truth was that the house she had left behind, the one sold out from under her by the son she had raised, was only part of her story. Decades ago, after her brother's estate had settled, she had sat in a quiet room with a financial advisor and made a decision that would change everything. She split the inheritance across multiple trusts, placed most of it in long-term investments, and signed non-disclosure agreements with banks and institutions to keep her name private. Her assets had grown steadily, untouched except for small withdrawals here and there to maintain a modest life. She had never told Marcus, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she believed the knowledge would do him no good. He had already shown signs of chasing status, even as a teenager. She remembered the way his eyes lit up around wealthy classmates, how he spoke with envy about their homes, their cars. She worried that if he knew, it would change how he saw the world and her. So she said nothing, and as the years passed, her silence became its own kind of safeguard. At the time they forced her to move out, Helen's net worth was just over $5 million, spread across trusts, hidden beneath layers of legal paperwork. It sat untouched, growing still. Not even her lawyer knew the full extent. Helen kept meticulous records, updated regularly, stored securely in places no one else knew existed. She wasn't hiding it out of spite. She simply understood the danger of being seen as someone worth exploiting. And now, watching how Marcus and Alicia had treated her in the absence of money, she felt oddly validated. They had assumed she was poor, that she was weak, that she was someone to manage, to tuck away quietly so they could move on without guilt. They hadn't asked questions. They hadn't wondered what she wanted. They had seen an aging woman in an old house and mistaken her simplicity for dependence. They had misjudged her in her new apartment. Helen began to write again, not just letters but detailed instructions. She outlined the structure of her trusts, the terms of access, the names of organizations she wanted to benefit when the time came. She named charities, schools, shelters. She created a new will, separate from the one Marcus had ever known. She contacted an estate attorney through a private referral service, never once using her full name over the phone. Everything was done with care. Quiet, thorough, intentional. She no longer cried. She no longer hoped for a phone call that didn't come. She had given everything she could to her son, her love, her home, her time. What remained was hers alone, and this time she would decide where it went. Months passed without a word from Marcus or Alicia. The holidays came and went without a card, a call, or a visit. Helen, meanwhile, fell into a routine of silence and resolve. She kept her affairs private, her actions precise. She had nothing left to explain. The new will was finalized, notarized, and filed in a secure location. It named no family, not Marcus, not any distant cousins or blood relatives she had once exchanged polite holiday letters with. Instead, it directed every dollar of her estate, $5 million and growing, toward causes she believed in: scholarships for foster youth, grants for underfunded public libraries, endowments for women's shelters, and donations to mental health programs that supported trauma survivors. She wrote a brief, personal letter to accompany the legal documents addressed to the executor of her estate. It was just a few paragraphs in her careful handwriting, explaining why she had chosen to give everything away. She didn't mention her son by name, only a reference to a boy I loved as my own, until love was no longer welcome. She signed it quietly, with no bitterness in her tone, just clarity. Helen began to detach further from the small things. She stopped watching the news, she stopped checking the time. Her days became soft around the edges. She still walked in the mornings, nodded to the staff when they greeted her, but she no longer filled the space with conversation. She wasn't lonely, just finished. She had said all the things she needed to say, even if no one had listened. It gave her a strange kind of peace. Marcus, meanwhile, had no idea. His life continued in glossy forward motion. He had recently been promoted to a managerial position in Alicia's father's firm. They bought a larger home, this one with a rooftop deck and heated floors. Alicia pushed to start a family. Marcus hesitated, vaguely citing timing and stress. Deep down, he felt something unsteady beneath his feet, though he couldn't explain it. He sometimes thought about Helen, but in brief flickers. A smell, a voice, a song from childhood. He told himself she was better off, cared for, out of the way. He never visited then. One ordinary afternoon, he received a letter. Not from Helen, but from a law office with no return name, just a sweet number and city. He opened it with mild curiosity, thinking perhaps it was related to property or taxes. But inside was a single page and a name he didn't recognize, an attorney informing him that Helen had passed away quietly, without request for a funeral or memorial. The letter stated plainly that there were no assets to distribute to him, and that he had not been named in the will. It gave no reasons. It offered no room for appeal. He reread it 3 times. Alicia asked what it said, and he handed it to her without speaking. Her face tightened as she read, confusion turning slowly into disbelief. "She didn't leave anything?" she asked. "Not even the house?" Marcus stared past her, thinking about the childhood bedroom, the garden, the dinners she used to make. It hadn't occurred to him until that moment that she might have had more than she let on. But even then, the idea of her being truly wealthy felt absurd. She had been so quiet, so plain, so careful. Later that evening, something gnawed at him. He called the lawyer listed on the letter, but the office was closed for the weekend. He searched online and found only a sparse website, no client list, no direct information, just a contact form and a brief bio about discreet estate handling. Alicia urged him to move on, if there was something left. She said we'd know. She probably used it all up on medical bills, or gave it to one of those causes she used to talk about. But Marcus wasn't sure, and that uncertainty, it grew. He started pulling old financial documents from her file folders, the few he had kept after selling the house. Old insurance statements, tax records, a list of her safe deposit boxes he had never opened. He visited a bank, tried to access one of them, but was turned away. The box had been closed weeks before her death. The banker offered no details, only a polite smile and a reminder that privacy laws prevented further disclosure. Marcus left the building with a coldness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. In the weeks that followed, questions replaced comfort. He replayed every interaction with Helen over the last few years, suddenly unsure of everything he thought he knew. He wondered what else she had hidden, what messages he had ignored, what kindness he had mistaken for weakness. But the silence left no answers, only space, and in that space, something began to unravel quietly, steadily, in the shape of regret.